Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. What a show we have on tap tonight. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth Motor City Madmouth. Glad to be your host tonight. And we have a special guest. And, used to be called a movie, well, there was a movie called Back to the Future, but tonight I'm going back to my past. And I want to welcome my good friend, Barry Foote, former Major League catcher, played for 4 teams. But Barry and I crossed paths in 1984 when we were working together at the Fort Lauderdale Yankees. Welcome to the big show, Barry.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Scott. I'm glad to be here.
Well, and alongside of Barry, we got Rick Curdy.
Hey, guys. How are you?
And a guy that's wearing a Yankees cap and hoodie, I believe, Eric Katz, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me, Scott.
You're very welcome. And last but not least, my colleague from 9 million years ago and to current George Icorn.
Another back to the past guy, George Icorn. Yes, that's me, Scott. Good to be on.
And I actually have to tell people something out there that the first time I saw Back to the Future was actually was it Southfield or Oak Park with you and I over at Northland, I think it was.
Yep.
And
Northland Theater. Yep.
Yeah, that was unreal. So here we are, Back to the Past.
Great movie.
And Will Vogel will get your comments in a moment. Want to go over some topics here with Barry. And Will Vogel is one of our contributors in the chat room, a really bright young guy who really does a lot of research on everything. But so bear with us a little bit. Well, all right. So let's go ahead and talk about your Major League career, Barry. Highlights of your MLB career. What are some of the ones that stand out?
Well, I guess from getting drafted in 1970 by the Montreal Expos, I was the number 3 draft that year. So that was exciting coming from a small town of 6,000. So that was the start of it. And then, obviously getting to the big leagues with the Expos in 73. And then, getting into the World Series in 81 with the Yankees. And, obviously there was some highlights in between all that.
Yeah. So you guys have any questions for Barry?
Barry, now when you were with the Expos, that was Dave Dombrowski around at that time?
No, that was many, many moons after that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And did you play in Jerry Park only or Olympic Stadium also?
I played in both.
Yeah. Do you ever foresee a day where they're going to get a franchise, Barry?
It's possible. Anything's possible. I think that, they're talking about they build a stadium downtown, so, you could do it, but it'll be difficult, but it's possible. Money talks. I think they got some money up there. And I think they have a pretty good, fan base up there.
Okay, Rick, I know you've been talking about you're the resident baseball guy that keeps talking about bringing Major League Baseball to Charlotte, but now you got a guy who's a former Expo. So what do you want to ask Barry?
How much has the game changed since you played?
Well, look, I'm not one of these guys say, back in the good old days. I believe the game necessarily changes. I'm a little bit concerned with some of the rule changes, some of the things they're doing to affect the essence of the game. But, they're trying to deal with kids who have, very short attention spans. So they're trying to speed the game up, get a 2.5-hour game. And all those things are, theoretically good. I'm just concerned with, how it's going to affect. I think one of the biggest things that they did that's smart is get rid of the damn position players pitching in games. Because baseball is a game of statistics, and you'd hate to see somebody, hit 62 home runs and 2 of them were off position players. I don't think that happened, but that was certainly, I think, besmirched the record. And I'd hate to lose a batting title or a home run title because somebody hit a home run off of a third baseman or you got 2 hits off of a position guy. I think that was really an insult to our game to allow that to go on, especially when you have 12 to 13 pitchers on the staff. These managers have got to smarten up and be able to use their pitchers in such a manner that, you're able to, you got to put pitchers in ball games. I think that's going to change this year, and it's all for the better of the game.
And you know what? I'm going to go more into detail with rule changes, Rick, later in the broadcast, but that's okay. I'm glad you touched on it. We'll elaborate a little bit more, but I know one of the things that's pretty interesting is a Montreal dynamic where, you want to believe that there's going to be a franchise. And I know the one thing that really wrecked baseball there was the 1994 strike because the Expos had a heck of a team, and they really, really did. And that was the year I thought they could go all the way. And baseball hasn't been the same. Even Ernie Harwell once told me, Scott, baseball went because of the strike. Eric?
Yes, you were late. Toward the end of your career, you were on George Steinbrenner's New York Yankees. What is the most interesting story you have about the boss?
Well, I'd say, the one that would be pretty interesting to the, people that follow the Yankees, and maybe people just had an idea. We were playing in the 81 strike year. We had an extra set of playoff games, and we won. We had to beat Milwaukee to get into the next level because they pitted the first half winner against the second half winner. So we go into Milwaukee and win 2 games. We come back home, we lose the first 2 games. So Steinbrenner, he comes into the clubhouse. I'm talking about a serious rant. And I think the funniest thing about the whole thing was, what was the owner's name that became the commissioner?
Oh, Bud
Selig.
Yeah, he said, you can't let a car dealer, a used car dealer beat us in a game coming up tomorrow. And then some players got in a yelling match with him. So that was unusual to have the owner in the clubhouse. And it was also funny the way he said Siegel was a used car dealer. I thought that was funny. And he went on to become the commissioner of baseball.
All right, well, I'm going to go to a question in the chat room from Will Vogel, so I'll read it very first off. Will says, thank you for answering my question, Mr. Foote. Anyway, on to my question. Some catchers have a favorite pitcher to catch for. Did you have one in your career? And if so, who was it? Well, that'll get you thinking a little bit, bring back some memories there, Bear.
Well, it depends. Probably the easiest and best pitcher to catch that I had in my career was Rick Russell when I was with the Cubs, because you could catch him in a rocking chair. I mean, he had unbelievable control. He threw the ball basically every pitch is where you wanted it. But the guy that was probably the most fun to catch because of the embarrassment he did to a lot of hitters was Bruce Sutter, because he could make guys look real foolish with that splitter. So I was fortunate to have caught a lot of Hall of Famers, but I'd say those two, from the standpoint of fun to catch, were fun to catch.
All right, well, obviously, I know Billy Martin managed the Yankees back in the days. Was he I think he was managing when you were there, right?
No, he'd gotten fired before I got there, and he came back after I was the I believe I was managing at AAA,
Right.
and he was the big league manager. So I never really, played under him. I saw him a lot in spring training. But
So, all right, let me go to George Steinbrenner for a moment. I'll never forget the time. I think it was a year that you and I were there too. That I'm covering the Fort Lauderdale Yankees, and I, me, I went to all the games. I didn't miss one. I really enjoyed covering them because at that time, the Florida State League was high Class A. Run across George Steinbrenner is nice to give me an interview. But you and I, Barry, know firsthand that you better not ask the manager a question earlier or he's going to get upset. And what I mean by that is so I asked him a bunch of questions. He loved to talk about, his prospects because he used to trade a lot of them away because he wanted to win now.
Right.
I know Rex Hudler was a guy that he moved on from. So then at the very end, I was asking him about the manager's question. Boom, that was the end of the interview. And he didn't want to talk about that, but the only thing that I felt good about it is when he ended up talking to Ted Koppel on ABC News Nightline. Teddy posed the same question, and Steinbrenner ripped into Ted Koppel like it.
Really?
It was me or Ted. At least the boss, to me, was very consistent.
There you go.
So tell me what. Let's go a little bit more detail into George Steinbrenner. I know he has a good heart, but boy, was he rough around the edges. What was he like to work for?
Well, it was interesting. If you've been a player, I worked directly for him in 1983. I had I had an injury coming off a bad back, and so the Yankees offered me a job after I, had decided to retire as a player. And so I scouted, and I did what they call special assignment scout. And so if they had special assignment, I'd go do that, and I'd report back to Steinbrenner. It would be like a major trade or something like that. And I had really good access because I'd just come off the field, so I could ask a player a question about a pitcher. Maybe he was having arm trouble. We didn't know about it. And, I had really good inside information. He was very respectful of you once you just came off the field. Now, after you got off the field for a while, it wasn't quite as much respect, but he did have respect for the fact that you'd been a player, and he had not been a player ever. And so I liked Steinbrenner. He was tough, but you think about it, he never got rid of people. He gave them jobs. You kept a job. Once you were a Yankee, you'd almost have to kill somebody to get out of the organization. So he was was a good man as far as that goes. And I saw him do some things that I thought were crass and were not something that I would want to do myself. But as far as he was tough but fair, is how I saw it. But it was funny. I'll tell you what was really funny.
What's that?
We were having meetings in I think it was 1983, and Eddie Robinson was not with the Yankees. He was somewhere else, and I think maybe the Indians, some organization, maybe it was the Rangers. And he used to talk about how smart Eddie Robinson this, Eddie Robinson that, great smart guy. So Robinson now comes over to our organization next year, and suddenly he's a dummy. How could you make that decision? Why did you give us that advice? Wow. So he was funny in that way. But, the bottom line was he wanted to win. And, he certainly, really put the Yankees back on the map where they needed to be. And he was a good thing for the Yankees. He did some dumb things, some things that, probably weren't more as good as you would like to see. But at the end of the day, he wanted to win. And he had a good heart.
And all those times that Barry, he fired and unfired or rehired Billy Martin.
Well, Billy was his guy. He was a Yankee. He was if you were a Yankee. But I did learn my lesson there. I when I was there, you look out there and he thought of Lou Piniella like a son. And when he was able to fire Lou Piniella, I said, well, nobody's safe. Because, he was as close to Lou as he was to his own children.
Sure.
Yeah, I know one guy that he really liked who preceded you in Fort Lauderdale was somebody I'm really close with for a while. It's Stump Merrill. Stump Merrill was quite a guy, too. Right. Did you get to know Stump very much at all?
Not really. I knew him a little bit, obviously, but we were always in different levels all the way through, and then he got up to the big league level. So no, I didn't get to know him a lot, but he was part of that group that came out of Maine, and there was a group of people that came out of Maine, the Butterfields and others that came out of Maine.
Yeah, Will Vogel has an interesting question. I know you coached at AAA, so let's get to it. Did you have a favorite player that you coached at AAA, which is Columbus?
Well, I had players that I'd been with for 3 years, all the way from A to AA to AAA. Like Orlando Destrada and
Orestes
Destrada and Dickie Scott. They came with me all the way AA to AAA. Lombardi, unfortunately, who's passed away. So there was a group of those kids that I really, really thought a lot of, and because I'd been with some of them as many as 3 seasons.
Interesting. All right, so let's talk about life in the minor leagues. I know you were a successful championship manager. After all, I was with you for one of them. So we're going to talk. Let's go back to the 1984 Fort Lauderdale Yankees. You won the title there, and then when you're done, we'll talk about the '87 Myrtle Beach Blue Jays. And you won a title there. By the way, I was working for the Gastonia Rangers. So we'll get over to the Blue Jays in a moment, but let's talk about that Fort Lauderdale Yankees team. What stood out about you during that championship run?
Well, I was a rookie manager, so I was learning on the job. I had a good group of kids there. The Yankees had you didn't have problems with Yankee players, with the Yankee minor league players, because Steinbrenner wasn't going to put up with it. So it was easy to get along with these kids. They were good kids. They were, you know, we didn't have a great deal of super prospects. We had a handful of guys that did get to the big leagues off of that team, but they were good, hard-nosed kids that played well at the minor league level.
All right, I should let everybody know that 108 Stitches Baseball Talk can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. Please like it, share it, okay, to your friends and family. Also, want to be a guest? No problem. Send your topic ideas to southfloridatribune@gmail.com. If you want to advertise, call 954-304-4941. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. So that's how you can find us. All right. So let's go back to, you talked about the Fort Lauderdale Yankees a little. Anything else that stands out about it? I mean, for the one thing at least you can say about that situation was in the Florida State League, the ballparks are built to a point where you were able to evaluate prospects fairly based on the actual dimensions, because they're the same ones used in spring training.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know that necessarily means a whole lot. I mean, you're going to evaluate players based on a lot of things, and the ballpark really doesn't have a major effect on that evaluation. But yeah, it was just a good group of kids. It was tough for us to win that. We played Tampa in the championship round and ended up playing the final game in Tampa. Yeah. And we actually had to come back to win that game. And, it was exciting. It was fun. Probably as much fun as I ever had in a single season in my career, including big leagues.
Well, geez, you're a rookie manager. You win the whole thing. Did you ever think it'd be that easy to win a championship?
I was more disappointed when I didn't win championships. I felt like we were going to have a good chance of winning championships every year. But, a lot, it really is dependent on how they move your players around. We were fortunate in AA and AA that, we had good players. We had good pitching. That's really the key. And, so in AAA, my year in AAA, we struggled, but we moved guys up and down all the time. And that's a tough level to manage. I'd say it's the toughest of all of them.
Oh, I believe that. So, all right, let's go to Myrtle Beach. The Blue Jays, you won a title there. I was working with the Gastonia Rangers at the time. All we did was lose 90-some games anyways and develop a lot of prospects. Still mind boggles me, but we addressed prior. Our team had Dean Palmer, Sammy Sosa, Juan Gonzalez, and boy, did we lose a lot of games. So why don't you explain the dynamic of how that all played out? We had the prospects, you had the hardware.
Well, if you look at that and you see those players develop and got to the big leagues and really were superior big league players, you may look at it and say the season was a very strong success and not a failure, because at the end of the day, you're there to develop players, and they did develop the players. I'm sure it took them a little bit longer to get to the big leagues from that level because they were all kids. I think Sosa might have been 17 or 18 years old at that level. Gonzalez couldn't have been much older. So they were all, very young. And, I'm sure that the next couple of years, they really threw up big numbers. And obviously at the big league level, they really were superior ball players.
Yeah, I remember Sammy. We were actually pretty good friends on that team. In fact, he gave the owner a hard time with one game left. She didn't want to put no dirt out there. Her name was Nina Farnsworth. I don't mind mentioning it because she can't sue me because she's kind of like dead. But anyways, but what the reality is, Sammy, what a great sense of humor. Nina, you cheap. Nina, you cheap. And then I ended up catching up with him when he was at Chicago Cubs. And I had to pull teeth to get that one-on-one, but I got it done. And he remembered me.
Then, of course, I could just interject. Dean Palmer, of course, became a Detroit Tiger after he left the Texas Rangers, and very well liked on the Tiger team, and it's such a professional. What a gentleman he was, Dean Palmer.
Yeah, I caught up with Dean, and not only that, Juan Gonzalez didn't want to take Mike Ilitch's money.
Yeah. I forgot about that story. You're right, Scott. We had the Tigers. He was Juan gone.
Yeah. All right. Well, okay. We've gone on from the minor league. So, all right, Barry, let's talk about the World Baseball Classic. Max Scherzer thinks it should be played in the middle of the season. And also, the Detroit Tigers signed a Nicaraguan prospect after he struck out 3-star hitters. What's your take on the World Baseball Classic? Let's start off with Max Scherzer. Should it be played in the middle of the year?
I think it's very difficult to really, decide who's the best team when you're playing with pitchers that aren't ready to really pitch. I think that's bad. I was talking to my son about it. Dad said that they might all actually be better off to go get the best college pitching prospects and let them come in and pitch because they're more in shape than these guys that are trying to get in shape. So
Right.
I think that's the worst part of it. But I don't know how you're going to do it in the middle of the season either. I mean, if you want to have a true international championship, it's probably going to have to be at the end of the year. You'd have to make some adjustments and have the season go a little shorter. It's all about money. I don't see them doing it, but it would be very difficult to do it in the middle of the season. When really the championship is what your whole focus is the whole year. And now you get in the middle of the year and everybody gets out of there, going forward. And now you got this, this tournament thing going on. I think the concept is good. I think it's just going to be hard. Maybe what they should really focus on is, maybe having a 4-team thing at the end of the season or something like the Final Four, and bring in Japan is most likely going to be your strongest team. But then the problem is Dominican Republic, most of their players are playing on other big league teams. So
Right.
I don't know how you do it. I think it's good. It's interesting. I'm not sure it proves a whole lot, but it does. It's an interesting thing for the fans.
So, what are your thoughts about the Detroit Tigers signing a young Nicaraguan prospect? I'll tell you what, the Tigers pulled out the contract. We like him. Boom, just like that, he's signed. And he's going to a minor league deal. I think that's probably the most interesting story, that all these young guys here from different countries are actually playing. And if they look good enough, what's to stop a scout from going ahead and making them know a contract? That's a pretty interesting way to get.
Well, I'd like to see if I'd be shocked if they didn't already have a scouting report on the guy. I don't think they just saw him that one, saw 3 at bats and said, "Oh, let's sign him." I'm sure they must have seen him somewhere along the way. But it's good for the game. It's a good story. It's good for everybody to talk about. But it's hard not to be seen or known. Although Nicaragua is a little bit different than the other Latin countries. But I think it's good. I think it's good he's signed. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if he can actually pitch.
Well, and the other thing is the Tigers have been lacking in their international wherewithal. I mean, they have not been aggressive in the international market as far as signing kids. So, the people in Detroit are kind of surprised, and because they did it, they pulled it off. But that being said, let's hope the kid has a good future ahead of him. Here in Detroit, we need all the help we can get.
Well, unfortunately, and I like the player very much. He's a Hall of Famer, but what happens is you get stuck with a Cabrera, who you've got to pay huge money for when his big numbers are behind him. But you got to honor the fact that he's a guy you're going to have to pay and play. That's why it's so hard to play. In the non-steroid era, it's hard to pay these guys huge dollars from 36 to 42. And in those years, you're going to be one out of 100 or 200 or 300 guys that are actually going to be productive in those out years of those long-term contracts. That's not to say he shouldn't have gotten all the money he did get, but man, when you got a guy on the payroll for 30 to 40 million, you got to play him, you got to keep him, and he's non-productive. And what do you do with it? You can't release him. It makes you look awful. And he's done a good job for the organization. So it's just a good example. It's going to be interesting to see how some of these other new contracts work out, where they're paying these guys huge money from age 36 to 40 to 42.
Well, you know what? That's a great segue, Barry. Okay, and that was leading to my next topic. Anyways, we know that Miguel Cabrera is retiring this year. Some thoughts of his career: Triple Crown winner, does win a World Series with, albeit the Florida Marlins, and went to Tigers. But when you think about Miggy, he knew how to have fun. and obviously the heck of a talented player, with the exception of the back end, like you just alluded to, Barry, paying a little bit more. But nevertheless, he's now a role model and leader. So why don't you give me your thoughts about Miguel Cabrera as a whole?
Well, I mean, obviously he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He was, one of the premier, probably you look back at his career, all time, he might be one of the top 10 right-handed hitters of all time, just because he hit for power and for average.
Right.
So yeah, he was a great player, and there's no question about it. And fortunately for him, he was with an owner that was willing to spend a lot of money back when that was a big contract, back when he signed that long-term deal.
Right.
But I have no issues with it, him. And the good thing about it, he did stay with the Tigers. I think these guys that are stars with the team and then they sign a long-term contract with somebody else, especially if they're like, I think Pujols made an awful mistake going out to California.
Oh, yeah.
He got a few more $1 million, but to what end? I mean, it's going to be more money than his next 2 or 3 generations could spend. And he could have had those down years in St. Louis, and they still build a statue for him. I think I'm glad to see a guy like the guy with the Yankees go ahead and sign long term. He'll be there for his whole career. I'm glad to see that. I hope when Trout comes up again. Well, I don't even know how old he'll be at that time. I don't know how to remember exactly how far his contract goes. I mean, it's a shame that we don't on the East Coast get a chance to see him play much. But I'd like to see these guys that are the real superstars of the team stay there, because they're going to make incredible money. And I think in retrospect, for most of them, if they look back at it, a few $1 million more, it's just not worth being idolized by your fans. No matter how you do, they're going to be behind you. Whereas I'm sure in California, a lot of people we're wondering what in the world Pujols doing out here now, because he was not productive. Although it's been amazing when he did leave there. He, in the position he was put in, he was pretty productive, with the Dodgers and others and the Cardinals. So it was good to see him end on a high note.
Oh, no doubt about it. Albert Pujols again, another first ballot Hall of Famer, and Aaron Judge. I'm glad he stayed with the Yankees for sure. So, Rick and Eric, do you have any questions that you want to ask pertaining to Cabrera at all?
Yeah, when you think of Miguel Cabrera, obviously the Triple Crown and MVPs, numerous All-Star games and whatever. Like, where do you consider? I know he went to a couple of championships in Detroit, and he won his championship very young with the Marlins. What do you consider him more as, a Marlin or a Tiger?
Well, I think for me, he's a Tiger. He was there, I think, the longest of his career. I actually saw that World Series that they beat the Yankees, and he was he was a prominent piece of that, even though he was only 19 or 20 years old.
Right.
So yeah, I think he's a Tiger.
Oh, we do too.
Rick?
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Rick?
So with Miguel Cabrera as the Tiger, do you think they'll have a statue in Detroit for him and join the likes of like Al Kaline and Ty Cobb as one of the greatest Tigers of all time?
Well, I think he's undoubtedly one of the greatest, because there again he's probably one of the greatest right-handed hitters of all time. So he from an offensive standpoint, obviously he was never a great defensive player, but he got paid to hit, and he did that very well for a long time.
Okay, well, let's go on to the rule changes. I know Rick touched on it earlier. Now we're going to get more specific. I'll go ahead and list each and every one, Barry, and then you can tell me what you think. The pitch clock, is that good or bad?
Conceptually good, but it's going to be taken advantage of, as you already see Scherzer and others taking advantage of it. I think it's conceptually a good thing, but it's going to probably have to be tweaked.
Okay, the ghost runner, I hate that one. Tom Gage is on
that's another one of those. I'll be honest with you, from the standpoint of just purely as a fan, I don't mind it, but from the standpoint of being, old school baseball, it's just, it doesn't seem right, doesn't feel right. I think it kind of takes away part of how the game is, the classic nature of the game.
Yeah, that's what Tom Gage mentioned last night. Let's talk about the larger bases.
I don't know why you need them, but if that makes reduces some injuries or whatever, I don't think that's a big deal.
I look at those bases; they look like a bunch of pizza boxes. As far as I'm concerned.
I don't get some of that, but
Yeah.
Well, aren't they trying to increase stealing too?
Well, they're trying to emphasize more speed.
Well, yeah, with the non-throw, you can only throw over one. See, there's another thing. You got the base stealing stuff. So Scherzer, for instance, I watched the thing on him. He's got a process where he'll hold, and by that time now the hitter calls timeout. Right? He's allowed one timeout per at bat. So now he comes back up. He's got 2 strikes on the hitter. He holds another time for 20 seconds. The hitter's all screwed up by now, and then he makes the pitch. So he's taking advantage of that, and so he's smart. He's a veteran guy. He mentally he can handle that kind of stuff. So I think you just got to be careful when you implement those kind of rules at the major league level. You can implement a lot of rules at the minor league level, and you say, man, they work really good. But you got veteran guys, and they're going to figure out how to take advantage of rules. And, just like I saw the other day, and I know we hadn't gotten to the shift thing yet, but, you got the manager, I think it was at Boston. He took his left fielder and put him in short right field, which does the same things the shift used to do because there's no rule about the outfielders moving around.
Oh.
Right.
So, these guys are not dummies, and they're going to have to tweak these rules. But I'm not totally against them. I think that, some of the rules they implemented before about having to pitch to X number of guys when you brought a reliever in was good, but it's just a lot different game today than it was back when I played.
Well, great. Now that you mentioned that one, let's talk about the 3 batter minimum. I don't mind that one only because relievers in the past used to pitch 2 or 3 innings anyways. So to me, that's the one I had the least problems with. What about you, Bear?
Well, I don't like the whole way they do the pitching staff anymore, and I think it takes away from the fans. And you've seen the batting averages. I think I saw a stat the other day that showed how many teams had team batting average from I think it was 2010 going backwards. How many teams had a team batting average below 240? And I think the number was 0. And the same thing going from like 210 forward was like 60 teams had below 240 batting average. And the problem is, you face the pitcher one time, it's advantage pitcher. And, that I think takes away from the fans. The fans want, they want to see some action and things like that. And I think that the more you take the offensive out, the less the fans like it.
All right, let's talk about the limitation on mound visits. I think there are allowed 3 or 4 per game, as I remember, right? Eric, do you know the exact number? Is it 3 or 4?
I believe it's 4.
Right, I think so too. So, limitation on mound visits. Does that bother you at all, Barry?
No, I think that's fine. I mean, about half the time they make a visit to the mound, they screw up more than they help. So keep them off the field.
Well, it doesn't really mind the fact that you're in the dugout, talk to your pitching coach and your manager anyways, which nobody ever bothers to see. All right, well, robot umps is probably going to come up anytime soon. So I'm going to let you go. Well, I know Rick's laughing. You'll get an opinion on
I'm
that.
glad you brought robot umps because that's a source of contempt for me for this reason. They're teaching these catchers that the worst catching in the history of the game is going on now. And they teach them how to try to catch, not to be a receiver, but to basically try to fool the umpire. Try to do this framing crap they try to teach. And what it's doing is teaching a lot of bad catching. And the reason they're teaching them that way is to fool the umpire, to create balls into strikes and stuff. What are they going to do now when they got these robot umpires? They've got a bunch of crappy catchers catching now. They've been taught not how to really receive the ball, but how to try to, frame a ball that's a ball into a strike. And now you've lost that part of the game, and you've really lost the art of catching a game. So that part I think that, and I agree with you. I think they'll do robot umpiring. I think they'll have an umpire behind there, but he'll be getting told just like the catcher's giving the signal to the pitcher. That's a ball, that's a strike.
Well, I know that when we were working together, I told you that I was a catcher and playing ball as a kid. And I had to admit, and I know you being a catcher too, you're smarter than anything else. I used to frame pretty good, and I can tell you right now, I got nailed for a lot more catcher's interference because my hand hit the bat, and boy, that hurt. And you know it as well. Any catcher that can go out and frame, you do play your position well, right? Hey, I'll admit, okay, I used to frame pitches. I used to talk to batters. I used to talk anything I could do with my voice. Not you guys would be surprised, anyways. I would try to manipulate the system to work for my pitcher's advantage, distract the batter, and work the umpire. All right, Barry, am I actually preaching to the choir with that one?
Well, I never got into a lot of conversations and stuff with the hitters. I didn't, that wasn't my game. There's a few guys, I guess, that did, with a little talkative behind the plate. But if you're really doing your job catching, you got enough on your hands. So Yogi, they said, used to talk to hitters a lot and stuff. But my experience of being in the game 24 years, I not many of the guys did a lot of talking behind the plate. If they were friends of yours, they might say hello, but there wasn't a lot of, we were different back in that time. There was fines for even, for talking to the players on the other team before the game. Now it looks like they're kissing and hugging out there. So, it's a lot different today than it was back in my day of playing.
Well, when I was in Little League, I don't think they were giving me a fine. And if they did, my dad would give me the business. But, I did anything I could to get in their heads and work them over. And said, you could have hit. I mean, it was just, I loved that position. I was probably the one position. I was a horrible outfielder. Okay. And, my arm was a little out of whack there so when I told my dad when the opportunity came to catch, and I was raising my hand so loud, he's good. He had a bad defensive player. He could stick behind the plate, warm up pitchers between these. Hey, that could keep his concentration. We made something productive out of this guy. Even though his batting wasn't good, I used to be a good bunter every now and then, surprise you with a hit. But, boy, my catching skills and using mound visits to distract. I mean, I love playing the position because it's a thinking man's position. In a Little League, I'm not worried about the fines. And later on, I kind of get it when there's money involved. All right. And last but not least, you talked about the shift. Obviously, they took care of the infielders, but not the outfield. All right, Barry, let's continue to talk about the shift.
Well, I don't know that they'll use it a lot, but I think a lot of times in the spring training, they're just testing the system to see how things will work. But I think it's good for the game that you've got the infielders on their side of the bags, where they should be. You can still shift them quite a ways without moving them across to the other side of the bag. But I think it's really going to help left-handed hitters. I think you're going to see their averages go up quite a bit.
Now, being a catcher, I know, to me, I've watched a lot of good marginal left-handed pitchers, but one of the ones that really I remember back in our day was Ray Fontenot of the Yankees. And, Stump Merrill always used to tell me, Scott, if the guy's a left-handed pitcher, he has a longer leash than a lot of right-handers because even mediocre ones get a chance in the big leagues. Do you subscribe to that theory that there's a little bit more leash for a left-handed pitcher rather?
There's no question. If a left-hander can get a left-handed hitter out, he's got to have a much longer career. So, I mean, if you can just get left-handers out and you're a left-handed pitcher, you're going to find a job somewhere.
Okay.
I believe last year, I think, if I'm not wrong, the Houston Astros didn't have a left-handed pitcher in the bullpen.
Oh, did they have a starter? I don't remember. I didn't look their roster over if they had.
Oh, yeah, they had a starter that was left-handed. They had two, but they had at least one. That and a pretty good one. I can't remember his name. He was a Latino kid. I think it was a Dominican kid.
I had the ability to work with Don Mattingly. Did you ever get to know Don Mattingly at all?
I played with Don, yeah.
What's that?
I played with him. So, yeah, I knew Don.
Do you think Don Mattingly should be in the Hall of Fame?
I think, if you're talking about the Hall of really, 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 really good players, yeah, absolutely. If you're talking about the old Hall of Fame, he probably missed it by just a smidgen. But, they've changed the concept of the Hall of Fame. So, and I'm not saying that's the worst thing in the world, but if that's it depends on how you look at it. If you look at Donnie's 7 best years, and I think that's one of the things they really look at. Yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. I mean, he was a great defensive first baseman, right. And he had a very large handful of really good years.
I worked with him the last 3 years as a manager with the Miami Marlins. You talk about a guy so knowledgeable, and he was very great with the media as well. Don Mattingly to me is, I do believe he's a Hall of Famer. And when you look at people like Kirby Puckett, the only difference between Kirby's career versus Don, a couple more championships with obviously could be a part of the voting process. But I was just curious since he was in this organization same time that you were. So, all right. So, Barry, did you ever have any thoughts about ever wanting to be a big league manager?
Oh, absolutely. That's probably the biggest regret of my career is not having a chance to manage at the big league level.
Was it? Yeah. I mean, you managed at all levels there anyways and won a couple of titles. So, all right. So now what I'm going to do is I want to talk about your post-career, and then I'm going to open it up to my crew to ask whatever they want to do. So we know that you're a successful business person in technology. How would you define what you've done away from the field? And do you miss the game that much? Or tell me what you do. I know technology. I loved what you said to me the other day when you said, I actually have a camera. I better since I have a technology company. That was a pretty good line. If you only inherited, guys. But but
I got
Barry,
into wireless telephonic type technology right after I got out of baseball in the early, when was that? The early 90s. And so I learned about wireless communication stuff. And, I had to fake it till I make it. I didn't know. I had a friend who had who had some wireless licenses. And so I went in and I learned about that. And then as I went through that, I ended up getting out of that and going into the oil and gas business in Alaska. And after that, went back into some more wireless stuff. So I've done a lot of things. I've owned minor league teams. I've done restaurants. I've had subdivisions that we built out several, 200 or 300 homes. So I've had a wide variety of things I've done post baseball career, and I'm still doing it. I'm involved in water purification projects now. My cousin and I patented technology to read water, gas, and so I things that have been interesting to me, and I continue to do that. And I guess I thought I was retired, but I guess I'm not. I'm supposed to be retired, but I sit on a couple board of directors for one company in Canada and one here in Raleigh, North Carolina. The Canadian company we do robotics and drone stuff and meter reading. And the one down in North Carolina that I work with my doctor buddy is we've actually developed a technology that will measure whether you've had a concussion or not, and do it with a visor type device that you put on, and then it measures before and after. It'll give you a before measurement of your brain and brain activity. And then if you have an injury like your quarterback down in Miami had this past year, you wouldn't have to wait for a doctor to give you an opinion. This device will actually give you a concise opinion without a doctor having to, put his, coin flip opinion on.
so all right, Barry. I know we've talked about the Montreal Expos, but now you got me curious about a couple of things. Question number one: what minor league teams have you owned?
Well, I helped develop the Carolina Mudcats, and we owned it at the same time the Greensboro Hornets. And I did another team in Sumter, South Carolina, with a friend of mine. So that was many, many moons ago. So I'd say the major one that I really helped develop was the Carolina Mudcats.
Oh, and then you also Greensboro Hornets, which again, I know Don Mattingly played there. So,
Yep.
All right, I know this is one of Rick Curry's favorite subjects. So we talked about Montreal possibly getting a team if they can ever get a stadium built over there. Tell me in your mind the top 3 or 4 cities that you think would be in line for potential expansion.
Well, I'd like to see a team in North Carolina. I know Charlotte would be the first one to come to mind because they're a population center, but the Raleigh-Durham area would be an outside chance of that. Probably population might not support it, but we do have hockey here, and they actually do pretty well. They've had some rough patches from the standpoint of their support. But now they're a big deal here. My grandson, 5 years old, they don't miss a game. I think Nashville's almost a certainty to get a team. It's a dynamic city that's continued to grow. And I could be missing one or two.
What about Las Vegas, Barry?
Well, Vegas obviously is probably one that'll be in the mix. Gambling used to be such a no-no. Now baseball's basically become a gambling game too. They with a wink and a nod, they're allowing the gambling to come in, not from the player standpoint, but they put out enough information, for the gamblers now to be able to gamble on it. And I think even the MLB website kind of has something that make you think about the gambling part of the game.
All right, well, and obviously, I think Vegas is going to end up getting the Oakland A's. And I know another city that they've talked about is Portland. To me, I
don't think any of those stuff over there. I think they've woke themselves right out of having a team out on the West Coast.
I think like Vegas probably will, because obviously Oakland's like their owner is very focused on going there, and also the team in Vegas, their minor league, their pro teams have proven to be a big draw for people, and also their minor league team is one of the most top drawing teams in all of organized baseball.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Montreal's got a shot. I really at one time was hoping to see a team in Mexico City, right. But it's just so hard. That you keep bouncing back whether the cartels really run that country. Can you have your players there and have them be safe? I go to Mexico, so I'm not a Mexico hater. I'm a Mexico lover, but I think that's a city of close to 20 million in their whole area there. I think it would be great for the game if they could do something like that. Maybe Montreal was able to get a team again in Mexico City, but I think too Nashville. You're probably only going to be able to support two more teams from the standpoint of quality of the product.
Right.
You don't want to get it too thin.
Well, wasn't it Tampa that talked about splitting a season, doing half and half? Yes. Montreal.
I think that would be a debacle. They've talked about it. I know the players would hate it. The families would hate it. I think it would be a bad idea. I think I like the demographics of the Tampa area long term. It's getting younger. It's on the coastline there. I think what they need to do is build a stadium downtown, make it more of a destination stadium, maybe make it like a Disney World for baseball, where you're doing a bunch of stuff involved with baseball, and have it where people come, because you got a lot of people down there all the time in the wintertime as well that are visiting all these parks. If you made a baseball park that was more of a destination location rather than just a baseball park, I think they could do well. But somebody's got to step up. And these stadiums now are $1 billion or more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's not small ball anymore.
And they're becoming more than just stadiums now. Now they're becoming big old entertainment complexes in districts where they have gambling. They'll have obviously bars in the stadium. It's not like what it used to be, where you had the stadium and that was it.
Well, you got to in order for because of the money you got to pay for these stadiums, you better be able to create some revenue opportunities besides the baseball, the 80-game baseball season, 81 game.
Hey, Barry, remember the time when Haines City had the baseball boardwalk? I think the Kansas City Royals moved there, and they replaced that. I remember the baseball boardwalk and out in Haines City. It's just too bad that never worked out, but I remember that. So, with that said, okay, I guess everybody would want to know your opinion on this one. Do you think Pete Rose ever gets into the Hall of Fame?
I think he will, but he may be dead. I think the committee will vote him in now. He's got Bench on his side, which Bench was a negative for a long time. So Bench is not negative. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Come on, let's look. If he's not in the Hall of Fame, he did something really dumb. He paid the price.
Right.
He's been suspended for 30 years or whatever it is. Yeah. I think he paid his dues on that. It's time to put him in the Hall.
Plus baseball is encouraging gambling now.
Right. So
if you put him in, you got to put Shoeless Joe Jackson in as well.
And I agree with that. I mean, you know, think about it. He took the money, but he didn't play like he took the money.
No, he had 376 batting average, hit the only home run in the World
Right.
Series, and he has a third all-time list in career batting average at 356, and hit over 400 in his rookie year. Never going to happen.
He also tried to talk to Charles Comiskey about getting the money allegedly, and Mr. Comiskey refused to meet him.
Yeah.
Well, the amazing part about it is, even if we talk about Rose, and I want to give everybody an opportunity on your own, guys, a chance to ask Barry a question. But the thing I want to ask you is, you know, you got Bonds out there, McGuire, Sosa, Clemens, the list goes on. And when we were talking, George, to Dom Gage, he doesn't see them ever getting in either. But what about you, Barry? You think that there comes a point where PED guys see the Hall of Fame, or their paraphernalia's in there and they have a little wing, but that's as far as they go?
Well, Bonds was a Hall of Famer before he ever started taking drugs, you know, before he took enhancement stuff.
Right.
He already won three MVP awards when he weighed 190 pounds. I think he's a Hall of Famer. And I'm not a big fan of his, but I think you got to go by accomplishments rather than his personality. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I think, that whole group of guys, I think, I just don't believe. The fact of the matter is, a lot of the pitchers were using performance enhancement drugs that they were facing. So I just think that I think you're going to see them go in long term. It might take a while, but I think they're going to get in. Some of them deserve to be in. No question in my mind.
Well,
Yeah.
a man you mentioned earlier, Bud Selig, it was on his watch. And so what do they do? They elect Bud Selig to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, well, the owners were complicit in all that. Look, in the minor leagues, when I was in the minor leagues, Canseco, the Canseco brothers were twins. We had one of the Canseco brothers in the Yankee organization. You probably remember this, Scott. He went out one year at 190 pounds. The next spring came in at 225, and he says, I remember this when he said, "Well, you should see my brother," and his brother was like 235. So ownership knew what was going on, and you knew this was going to be a major thing when they had the commission go out there, and 20% of the guys, in the performance testing, where 20% of them were using steroids. Mm-hmm. So, you knew it was a major problem. My son used to tell me that it's more like 50%. And I just said, no way. And I kind of believe he was probably correct. He was a minor league player with the Braves, and he said it was rampant.
Well, I can tell you right now, Rick, Eric, and George, Barry and we hung out a lot in that Yankee clubhouse. And we were just talking about baseball. I'd sit in your office and we would do all kinds of stuff. Do you remember all the times that we spent together in that stadium, how I'd pick your brains about certain things?
Yeah, that was a good stadium. That was basically a big league facility. So we had good place to sit and talk and all down there at Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, I was a young pup too. The two ones I worked for were Stump Merrill, then you, Barry, and then I learned a lot in those first few seasons. Then, you know what? I ended up going to Tampa after we beat the Tarpons, and I worked with Mark Bombard. It was weird. You and I was part of that championship team covering you, and then I'm going to University of South Florida, and lo and behold, I'm with the Tarpons at the time. Well,
that's funny. And
then Mark Bombard was joking around with me. Well, you're with me now. I said, yeah, I know. So, but hey, that's where I ended up going. But, like I tell people, I'm a Yankee at heart too. How do you not, when you're covering undoubtedly I think America's team when it comes to, franchises in MLB. So, but Barry, I tell you, I enjoyed the conversations that we had. I would talk to you a little bit about strategy, players. We talked about everything. Right. You would understand that Barry and I were pretty much inseparable there, after the game before. It was just a whole lot of fun covering minor league ball. So, all right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give each and every one of you an opportunity to ask Barry your own question. And when we do that, get a little bit more depth about what we're talking about. So, once again, this is 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth, your host. Pleased to be joined by my good friend, Barry Foote, longtime Major League Baseball player as well as coach and all that. So he's kind enough to join us here tonight on 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. But before I go ahead and turn it over to my guys, I just want to let everybody know again, I probably won't have a chance to do it later anyhow, so let's do it now. The 108 Stitches Baseball Talk can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. So whether you're walking your dog, whether you're driving, catch us that way. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. That's all. And more, but we'll be happy with 1,000. Want to be a guest? No problem. Send topic ideas to South Florida Tribune at gmail.com. And if you want to advertise, call me at 954-304-4941. We are live here on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And of course, if you want to catch me on Twitter, you can find me at Tribune South. All right, I'm going to start with you, Rick Curdy. And by the way, I want to let, just so you know, Barry, Will Vogel does happen to live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Rick Curdy's backyard. All right, Rick, what's your question for Barry?
Well, for many, many years, as Scott knows this, I've always wanted to see Fred McGriff in the Hall of Fame. He finally got in. Now, my next question, I think Billy Martin deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. How do you feel about that?
I could see the argument for it, and I also, having been a big leaguer, could understand how you could make an argument against it. More for some of the off the field stuff than on the field stuff. But the way the Hall of Fame is kind of put together now, I could understand how he could get in the Hall of Fame.
Well, an interesting story. I mentioned this last night with Tom Gage. I'll mention it here again. I remember when the day Billy Martin was killed on Christmas Day was the same day I tore my ankle in a skiing accident up in Magic Mountain in Vermont. Why do I mention such a significant thing? Well, when people want to know about my medical history, when it came to that particular injury, I Google Billy. I know the exact date, know the location, and move on to my other 2.5 hours that you need to find out. That's one thing I don't have to memorize. So, yeah, I tore, Barry, when it comes to injuries, I wish I would have broken that left ankle instead of had torn ligaments because I was in a cast 6 months, which subsequently led me to 2 knee operations. So,
yeah.
Billy Martin, I'd love to see him in the Hall of Fame too. Whether he gets in there or not, who knows? But he's the type of guy that was like a Band-Aid on a franchise because he took a lot of teams, went instantaneously with them, but wasn't able to stay long, although I think Oakland was one of his longer stops. All right, Eric, what's your question for Barry?
Yep. During the 81 season, the strike year, in the beginning of that year, you cracked 5 home runs in 7 games during that time. Do you ever wonder, what if, in case let's just say the strike never happens, do you wonder what would have happened had you been able to keep up that momentum?
Well, obviously that momentum would have been extremely good, but it was being with the Yankees, I met them on the road, and I hit all those home runs on the road. 5 in the first 7 games I played, so that was good because the Yankee fans could be tough, and it was good to come into Yankee Stadium with some success. In fact, it was funny. I hit my home run my first at bat with the Yankees, and that meant that I hit a home run before Winfield hit his first home run. He actually hit his first home run that same game, but after I did, he was making several $1 million contract at that time. So I laughed at him about that. I said, "Hey, big boy, you better step up. You can't let this guy come in there and hit the home runs when you're the one that's supposed to be carrying us here."
So Barry, who's your manager in 81?
At that time, it was Stick
Michael.
Michael.
Gene Michael.
Gene Michael was the manager, and then he ended up getting fired. I don't know if Clyde King came in interim, but Lemon ended up being the manager in the World Series. Bob Lemon.
But Gene Michael, I know the one thing, I don't know if you ever talked to George Steinbrenner, but do you think one of his biggest regrets was letting Dick Hauser go after he won that many games?
Yeah, I don't know. I never heard that ever talked about. So okay. I don't know.
Well, we all know that Dick had a heck of a career with the Royals, and I know his numbers retired at Florida State as well as Kansas City. All right, George, what's your question to Barry?
Well, Barry, we've talked about the haves and the have-nots, the mid-market to the lower market cities, and I know Rick and Eric and Scott and I have had this discussion. You know, you got teams like Oakland and Tampa, Minnesota, Detroit, Milwaukee. I mean, how are these teams going to compete without a salary cap, Barry? That we don't have that kind of money. We did, but he's dead now. His name was Michael Ilitch, and his son, trust me, will not spend that money in Detroit. So we're stuck here now with a team that's trying to rebuild and rebuild. Do you ever see a day when we would have any kind of cap or any kind of equality among these team owners?
Well, you know, you could possibly have it, but it would have to be associated with a guarantee of how much these players will be able to share. You know, baseball, a lot of people don't realize this, of the three major sports, their total salaries compared to total revenue is the lowest of the three sports. You know, the other two major sports, they basically almost do a 50-50 split. It's very close to 50-50. Baseball's at about 42%. So, you know, if they bump that up, but, you know, you're going to have a hard time. You know, you got a guy like with the Mets now who has unlimited budget, evidently, and the Dodgers have an unlimited budget. The Yankees, you know, are not like that anymore. They spend when they have to spend, although, you know, they spend a bunch on a pitcher, they spend a bunch on an outfielder.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm never a believer in salary caps I was a player rep when I was a player. So, but it's changed. There's a lot of money. I think if you got to a point where, you know, you did revenue share and you did everything and tried to equal the field a little bit, but, you know, the halves are going to be hard to deal with. You know, the Yankees, big market teams are going to be hard for them to give up their advantage, and their advantage is, you know, but in the same vein, Tampa's shown that you can compete if you're smart. And so, you know, I think a lot of these teams just got to get smarter. But it is hard when you think about, you know, the Mets. What are they going to have, a $350 million payroll or something this year? I mean, it gets a little crazy.
Yeah, well, when you got Steve Cohen, who figures he can spend basically interest money off on these players, what do you expect? That's why another tier when it came, we call it the Steve Cohen tag. So,
well, I think it's good for baseball because the Yankees are going to compete, you know, against him. So they'll end up spending some money as well.
Well, all right. I'm curious now, and I didn't ask Tom Gage this, but I'm going to ask you, what are your thoughts about interleague play?
Well, I can see it from the standpoint of the fans want to see teams they don't get a chance to see. But, you know, it was good to have, you know, to not have interleague play. But I get it. I mean, I see why it makes sense to have interleague play. You get to see teams that you've never seen before. So from that standpoint, it's good. But then again, you know, you have interleague play and it might be a team that you just can't compete against for some odd reason. And you end up losing your division by a game. Would have been probably better to play those games against your own division or something. But I don't have a real issue with it. I think, you know, baseball is for the fans at the end of the day. And if they get a chance to see other teams, that's probably a good thing.
That's yeah.
Yeah, and my last question, actually, and there is a last question, it's the universal designated hitter for both leagues. Any thoughts about that?
Well, it's probably good for the game that they want to have today because, you know, it's not a strategic game much anymore other than the pitchers. You know, they run those pitchers out. You know, you throw out there 7 or 8 guys in a game for pitching. So I think a DH, you know, it's just a different game. When you had designated, you know, when you didn't have designated hitter, you really have a lot of strategy. You had to bunt the guy over. You had more hit and runs. You had a lot of different type of small ball that you don't have today.
Well,
but, you know, if I was a player, I wouldn't mind it because, you know, it gives you an extra body that's going to be on the roster that's, you know, it's a hitter.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add anything?
Well, one other guy that hasn't been mentioned much, and I still don't know, and Tom Gage didn't really give me a good answer last night. Lance Parrish, a great catcher. He was a coach in the Detroit system and a manager out at West Michigan, but I don't know. I don't know if he doesn't want to be a manager in the big leagues. Do you know anything about Lance and why he wouldn't get a shot?
I don't know. I don't really know Lance very well. You know, I played the majority of my career in the National League, and then I coached 2 years in the National League. I obviously played against him when he was with Detroit, when I was with the Yankees. So I don't know him very well, but, you know, obviously from the standpoint of Hall of Fame type guy, he's probably just a borderliner there. But I don't know him well enough. Talking about the Hall of Fame, the one that I think is the biggest mistake so far is Andruw Jones. I mean, he should be in the Hall of Fame. You're talking about a center fielder who hit 400 home runs and is arguably statistically the best defensive center fielder of all time, if not the best, easily in the top 5, and hit 400 home runs, and he can't get into the Hall of Fame. He'll be voted in one day, but it's just, to me, that never has made sense to me at all.
Yeah, I think Dave Parker and Dale Murphy can punch their ticket down the line, hopefully, to the veterans.
Possibly. Yeah, I think Murphy maybe more so. Although, Parker was a superstar player. You didn't want to see him come up there in game-winning situations. Same with Murphy. So, they're both certainly quality guys.
Well,
I think Jeff Kent, there's another guy. I mean, how's he, the writers don't like him because he's has a crappy personality, but statistically, he should be a Hall of Famer.
We got one in Detroit, Lou Whitaker, the second baseman.
Whitaker, I'll tell you the truth about Whitaker. I was playing against him. I thought he and Trammell were very, when I see they got in the Hall of Fame, and one did, one didn't, I thought they were both borderline Hall of Famers. But I could see the argument for Whitaker, just like the argument for Trammell. Trammell obviously got in. And, it'll be interesting to see what the Veterans Committee does with Whitaker long term.
Are there any guys in today's game that you could see getting into the Hall?
Well, I mean, Trout's already got the numbers to be a Hall of Famer. A lot of these guys, it just depends on how they finish up. Scherzer, Hall of Famer. Verlander, Hall of Famer. There's a good handful of guys that are going to be Hall of Famers. Basically, look at the teams that win World Series, and you're going to see 2 or 3 Hall of Famers on those teams. I mean, it's just the nature of the business.
Well,
you got Hall of Famers.
Well, no show would be complete if I didn't bring up Mickey Lolich, for crying out loud. Here's a guy who, to me, won 3 games in the 68 World Series, ate up a lot of innings, a lot of complete games. I know Tom has been
a lot of strikeouts.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll wrap it up with the Lolich thing. So what do you think about Mickey?
Well, I saw him at the end, more of the end of his career when he was with the Mets.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to see him a lot, but you guys would know better than me. I think a lot of these borderline pitchers are going to have a little bit of different look at him because, we're not going to get any more 300 game winners. That's over with. So, it'll be 200 game winners will be the next plateau. And I think that's where you're going to see most of these new Hall of Famers going to be in that 200 to 250 range. So, guys like, and, that's where Tommy John might sneak in, because he had a lengthy career and, he's got an operation named after him. So,
Yeah.
And, Jim Cott got in finally.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Should have been a long time ago.
Cott
Michigan.
and John were similar.
Well, folks, it's back to the past with Barry Foote, the manager I work with, 1984 Fort Lauderdale Yankees, and beat me in 87 when I was working with the Gastonia Rangers. Oh, my goodness. But, the biggest winner out of this is myself, because Barry's been a good buddy of mine for a lot of years. And I'll tell you, it's great to be reunited here with you tonight, Barry, with a great crew here. These are my core people anyways. I wanted to make sure I brought you on with these guys. I'm so glad to have you back on, and I'm looking forward to you getting a Lauderdale or me getting a North Carolina or whatever comes first. But we are going to get together before this is all said and done. I hope that we'll pull it off sooner than later. But Barry, it's so great to have you on, and I am sure the crew probably has enjoyed.
Oh, thank you.
Opportunity to interact with you as well.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, nice meeting you guys, and maybe when I'm really upset over something that's going on in baseball, I'll shoot you a text. So let me get on here and complain a little bit.
Well, you know what, Barry? I'm going to tell you right now, okay? You and I, we text a lot back and forth. You can come on anytime you want. You can come on with 15 minutes notice for all I care, and I will make sure you get on here. After all, it is what it is, Barry. I mean, good friends are hard to find, and I think the one thing I could say about baseball in my many, many years in this game, and I remember talking to Brian Butterfield as well as a lot of Kevin Rands, you may lose touch with some people in baseball, but when you see them, it's like you bingo. It's like, where does the time go? I remember you by. That's just the kind of sport for a lot of people in baseball. The memories and the friendships you gain, to me, are just off the charts. Hey, come on, Barry. You know, how many times have I told you got an open invite to come on here, and I'll reiterate what I said until I can't stop talking, although a lot of people don't see that happen anytime soon anyways, but whatever. So with that,
I appreciate it, Scott, and I look forward to doing it again and seeing you in person somewhere down the road here soon.
So Barry, can you let everybody know how they can get a hold of you if you want to, and then we'll go around the horn one last time, and we'll be all ready to wrap up. Is there any way you want to get a hold of you?
My email address is bcfoote, just like you spell my name, BCFFOOTE @AOL.com. I've had that for 30 years and I keep it. So that's how you can get hold of me.
That sounds good. All right, we'll go around the horn one real quick before we wrap her up. Rick, go ahead and let everybody know they can get a hold of you.
You can find me on my website, www.charlottebats.com. We have a petition on there. We want to bring Major League Baseball to Charlotte, North Carolina. So, Barry, get on there. I'd love to have your signature. I'm also on Facebook at Charlotte MLB, Charlotte Bats Baseball. I'm on Instagram at Charlotte Bats, and I'm on Twitter, Charlotte Bats Baseball. I'm also on LinkedIn under Rick Curdy. If you have any comments or questions, our email address is cltbatsbaseball@gmail.com.
All right, Eric, go ahead.
You can find me on my Twitter at Sports Team News, or I'm on Facebook. I also write about all things baseball on my blog called bellyupsports.com.
George?
Yeah, Barry, I sat down with guys like Ernie Harwell and Paul Carey, Ray Lane, George Cal, Al Kaline in the Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air, so I'm always hawking my book here. Scott's in this book too. Scott interviewed a lot of people in his career, including yourself, Barry, but he's noteworthy for two pictures in here. Mm-hmm. Barry, he interviewed Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time, and Jimmy Connors.
Wow.
So the book's available. I write for Scott's paper, South Florida Tribune, online, and the Motor City Tribune. You can reach me at gicorn@yahoo.com. You can also see me on Fire Up Michigan and Sports Exchange and other shows here on Scott's network. And Barry, it was great meeting you and having you tonight.
It's my pleasure, guys. Enjoyed it.
I've gone over everything on the ticker. I'll just say this. If you're on Twitter at Tribune South, also check out our website, www.southfloridatribune.com. Special kudos to Candy Ebling. He does a marvelous job keeping it all together. And, everything. Please subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. So once again, on behalf of Rick Curdy, Eric Katch, George Eichhorn, and my special guest tonight, my lifetime friend forever, and obviously it was back to the past, Barry Foote. This is Scott Morgan, Roth Motor City Manmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. We will catch you next week. Have a great night, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Barry.
Good night.